on All India Muslim Personal Law Board. And the reason why I took this topic because my PhD was from 2013 to 2018, and in JNU you get your PhD synopsis passed after 2 years. You are given sufficient time to do research and to think about think about the topic what you are really interested. At that time I was reading Urdu newspaper, and I found that Muslim Personal Law Board, triple talaq, the condition of Muslims women, they were too much discussed by media, too much. And I think the Muslims community were being demonized, and it is not the narrative among, let's say, the communal forces or Hindu right forces. I think what sociologists say that it has become the common sense, and I have begun my PhD with a few lines that whenever I talk about the issue of triple talaq and Muslim Personal Law Board, any person be he is standing or sitting on a train, or be that person is standing in the market or at dhaba, that person has said that I know more than you, and I have found and I have experienced that that person is able to know more about Muslim Personal Law Board than what I know. They know more about Muslims women than I know. So it was a very interesting experience for me, and then I thought that I should do All India Muslim Personal Law Board. And in CHS it was very difficult to get it passed, because generally the center has been doing research on social and economic history, and then to do a research on one body at CHS, it was also a very difficult thing. So I think all of you who have joined this group, I think they all have a strong opinion about Uniform Civil Code, the Muslim women, gender question. So what I will try to do, I will talk about 5 or 6 myths about Muslim Personal Law Board, or about Muslim women, about polygamy, about the suffering of Muslims women, and then I will try to present to you a different fact. You just think it over. You also give me your comments and your suggestions how far I am correct. So friends, first of all I will give you very brief idea and history about what is Muslim Personal Law Board. In our constitution, you know it very well that we have minority rights, we have fundamental rights, and article 25 and plus, they say that in this country people are given religious freedom, and minorities have freedom to profess their religion, to believe their religion, to propagate it, and also manage their religious institutions and their educational institutions. So these were part of the fundamental rights that cannot be denied. But what has happened that in our constitution, I think in part number 4, there is also a section that is called directive principle. In directive principle, article 44 says that a state should strive for enactment of uniform civil code throughout this country. So that issue at that time were debated, and there was no consensus at that time. There were people both in Hindu right-wing group and also in the Congress party, they were firm supporter of Uniform Civil Code, and they said that Uniform Civil Code must be enacted for the unity of this country. And at that time, Dr. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee, he was paying attention to what people are saying, and finally he rose up, he stood and he said that no law should be enacted by the state that people are not willing to accept it. If a state is imposing any law on the people, then people will rise in rebellion and it will revolt. So Dr. Ambedkar, in my reading, he was a supporter of Uniform Civil Code. He was a modernist, so he thought that uniform law is better than religious and communities law. But he was also he was also a person who believes that law should come from the legitimacy. It should be made with the legitimacy of the people. It cannot be imposed. And in Ambedkar writings, one very important contribution of Ambedkar in democratic theory is that minority rights. And generally, friends, when I say minority rights in today's context, you think that minorities means only Muslim, Christian. No. In Constituent Assembly, minorities denoted the term who were not caste Hindus. So religious minorities were also part of minority, and also the tribals and the Dalits, they were also seen as part of minorities. Many people dispute my claim. They do not believe it, that in the earlier period of the making of the constitutions, people including Vallabhbhai Patel, they were in favor of giving reservations, but when the constitutions was ready, the reservations for the religious minority were removed. And Aisa Jalal, the well-known historian, she has argued, and so Shabnam Tejani, they have questioned the making of Indian constitution, and they have argued that somehow the Hindu consciousness was so powerful that after 1950s, after the completion of the constitutions, the only backwardness was recognized on the basis of caste. It was not recognized on the basis of religion. And friends, not many people want to remember it, that before independence, the Muslims and the other religious communities were given reservations. When the reservations were removed, when large number of middle class people, they went to Pakistan, then Muslims were left with no political empowerment. At that time, if the ruling elites or the makers of the constitution, if they thought that reservation based on religious policy is not good, then they should have thought about making any other plan for the empowerment of the Muslims community. But that did not happen. Not many people believe that by 1940s, the Muslims were in large number in military, the Muslims were in large number in police. In Uttar Pradesh, the Muslims were around 40% in the police, and Hindu Mahasabha at that time were making a campaign, and it was talking about jiski jitni sankhya bari uski utni hissedari. The very argument which is given by Dalit and Bahujan and Hindutva people are not comfortable about this debate. But when the Muslims were in large proportion in the army and the police, the Hindu right wing were talking about why, how could Muslim who are in less in number, they could be in army and the police in such a large number. So at that time they were talking about proportional representation. But now when the OBC, the Dalits, the minority, when they talk about proportional representation, the Hindutva people will come and they will say, no, don't talk about proportional representation. Don't talk about reservation, because it will break the Hindu society. So that was the scene. And then Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar said that, okay, that postponed it. He didn't use the term postponed it, but the clear mandate was that law cannot be made, that people are not ready to accept it. So it was put under the directive principle, and you know it very well that unless directive principle is made into law, it is not effective. Friends, not many people know that Muslim Personal Law Board was reformed in 1937 in the form of the Sharia Act. Not many people want to recall it, that when the Britishers came, they did away with the 98% or 99% of customary laws and religious laws, and be it Hindu or Muslim or any other religious community, our 99% of life is governed by uniform law, that is secular law, that is territorial law. So in legal language, you have to we make a differentiation between the territorial law, secular law, uniform law versus the personal law or community law. Personal law and community laws are those laws which are related to family, divorce, succession, management of trust. These are very small part of our life. In our 90% of our life, which is related to education, which is related to trade, which is related to wages, which is related to crime, we are governed by the same law. So Abhay Kumar, born in a Hindu family, will be punished for the theft to the same amount of days in the jail, and he will be fined the same amount of money if the culprit is Muhammad Aslam. So many people do not want to recall it, do not want to tell us that when 99% of our life are being governed by, let's say, by the uniform law, what is the need to go for uniform law? Another important point is that if you are a Muslim and if I am a Hindu, and if you want to marry and if you do not want to follow our personal law, then there is a special marriage act. You can get out of that. So it is not that Indian constitution has no place for you to get out of your community's law. The provision is there. You are only following it because you want to do it, because it is part of your religious belief, and religious belief is part of India's constitution's fundamental rights. Friends, when Hindu Code Bill was being made, Dr. Ambedkar was given responsibility. Not many people want to recall it that Dr. Ambedkar wanted to do radical reforms, but he was frustrated by the Hindu right. Nehru was also not supporting Dr. Ambedkar, and Dr. Ambedkar had to resign. Not many people want to recall it that when Uniform Civil Code was being made, the opposition was not made by the Muslim, it was not made by Nehru, it was made by the Hindu right, by the Hindu Mahasabha, it was made by Janasangh, which was the earlier avatar of the BJP. So today the BJP has become the biggest champion of women's right. Now I am asking the questions, when Hindu Women Code was being introduced, why did you lead people against Nehru, against Ambedkar, against any reforms in Hindu society? Why did you oppose it? Not many people want to recall it that when Nehru was contesting elections in 1952 general elections, the only issue was against Nehru that Hindu Code Bill was being intervened by Nehru, and society is being intervened by the state. So that when the RSS, when the BJP, when they were out of the state power, they were giving the argument that a state has no right to intervene in the society. But today what is their argument? That a state has every right to intervene in the society. Friends, I am not taking position, I am just giving you different narratives which our media, our ruling class is not giving. Friends, you have to also recall and remember it that in 1972, Shri Golwalkar, MS Golwalkar, the Sar Sangh Chalak, the chief of the RSS, was interviewed by organizer, not the mouthpiece of the BJP and the Janasangha. And at that time, the journalist asked him, "Sir, are you supporter of Uniform Civil Code?" Then Golwalkar said, "No, I do not support it. I support harmony, because India is a place of people from different religions and different cultures. We do not need uniformity. We need harmony." But what has happened? That in Shahbano in 1980s, Shahbano is a Muslim woman from Bhopal. She was divorced by her husband. That was wrong. And then the matter was brought to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that maintenance should be given to that. At that time, Muslim religious leader were also made some mistakes. They also did not realize that this is not such a big issue that they should agitate it. And then after that, the BJP realized at that time that it is the right time to take up the issue of the image of oppressed Muslim women. And since 1980s, Ram Janam Bhoomi and then Uniform Civil Code, they were made the integral part of Hindutva agenda. And in 2019 general elections also, the Uniform Civil Code continues to be the pet agenda of the Hindutva forces. Now I am asking a question: if 99% of our life is governed by Uniform Civil Code, why there is so much hangama about it? I am asking another question: if the Hindu right opposed Uniform Civil Code, when they opposed, Hindu Code Bill, how could they claim themselves as the, as the Messiah of Muslim women? The third point is that, if condition of Muslim women is bad, then what is the conditions of the Hindu women? What about the killings of the Hindu women in the name of dowry, in the name of, let's say, so many other practices? Domestic violence is another issue, and the widowhood is another issue. So I am not saying that reforms should not happen, but why shouldn't we talk about women's reforms? Why shouldn't we talk about the suffering of women collectively? Why we are looking at the issue of Muslims and Hindu, the Muslim women and Hindu women? In Bihar, we come from northern India. You see the situation that a girl who is grown up, how much parents are under the pressure for the marriage, and they have to beg, they have to sell their land, they have to sell everything for the dowry. That is not the issue. Then the argument is being made that Muslims are marrying 4 wives. Now the question is, Zafrul Islam Khan, the former Minority Commission chairman of Delhi, tweeted some time back, okay, if you get any Muslim man who has married 4 wives, please bring that person to me or give him the address. I'll give you 10,000 rupees as prize. Nobody has ever come and nobody has ever said that he has located a person who has married 4 wives. Now, in 1972, there is a report, and that report says that polygamy is more common among Hindus, among Jains, among Buddhists, among tribals, and it is least among Muslims. Now, it is also being debated that if uniform civil code is being made, then population of the Muslims will go down. Not many people are talking about that the population of Muslim is going down. It was 29%, the growth rate was 29% in 2001, and it has come down to 2011. There is a very important book written by Y.S. Qureshi, the former Chief Election Commission, the Islam and the Family Planning. You should read it. I have just got the book. He has completely demolished the myth of Muslim women producing more and more children. So my argument is that reforms must happen, reforms should also happen, and the question of women is very, very important. And I accept that our society is based on, let's say, patriarchal values, but we should never try to communalize it. We should see the issue of Muslim women, Hindu women collectively, and we should fight this struggle collectively. We should never think that Muslim women are only suffering. And there is one sociologist, I think she is from the Middle East, and Sanjay ji is aware of that work. I think Laila Loghad, I think, if I am not able to recall her name. And she has basically written a book, and the book is aptly titled. Yes, Sanjay ji. Logat kuch, okay. So she has basically argued in her book that do Muslims women need saving? Friends, you have to always keep in mind that when Taliban regime was there, they were making laws against Muslims. We are not saying that that law was great and that law was very important. But what Western media has done, they have printed a picture of Muslim women suffering. And what has happened when the imperialistic forces have gone inside the Taliban? Is the problem of Muslim women addressed, or has it had been aggrieved? B. Geeta, well-known feminist scholar, said once to us in JNU that you should always remember, always keep in mind this image of a bird which is caged in a pijara, which is put in a cage. And what has happened? The bird is a woman, and the cage is patriarchy, and the person who is trying to liberate that cage, that bird, is cat, and that cat is Hindutva forces. So if we are standing outside, what should be our position? Should we allow Hindutva forces to liberate that bird from the cage so that the Hindutva forces and communal forces should eat it? Or should we allow that bird to be in the cage? That is a very, very difficult situation. There is no easy answer. So my argument or my position would be that we should always cross-check the facts. We should always take insight from the history. We should always use sociological insights. We should do away with commonsensical understanding, and we should fight for equality. We should fight for gender justice. We should never allow gender issues to be communalized and to be used by Hindutva forces, and we should never allow that minority as a threat or the